I am so glad that you are here. It's another day in paradise out there. So it's wonderful that you are here, and we're all lucky to be part of all of this, and we're grateful that you're here. We're grateful for the conference that we've had together. We're hearing good things. I'm proud of the speakers that we've had. And today's not going to be any different. Today's going to be, I'm going to browse by day on my phone. Today's going to be really good also, starting with these NAATP talks. So I just want to say a few words about that. We're going to have two general sessions with a break in between of what we are now calling NAATP talks, like a TED Talk. Each session is 3 20-minute speakers who are going to go boom, boom, boom in 20 minutes. They've got a clock. It's hard to put together. I do a lot of speaking, and if someone asks me to do 2 hours, that's easy. That's fine. I don't have to prepare. 20 minutes is hard, right? You got to put that together and be precise. So I've asked these 6 brave, wonderful individuals to do that for us, and I think it's going to be great. I know it's going to be great, and it'll be kind of fun that we're all sort of participating in that. So with that, here's how this is going to look. This is General Session 2, and it's called NAATP Talks, A Brave New World. So the unifying theme of these 3 speakers is that this is how we're proceeding in the environment that we find ourselves in. We're moving forward, and we're bringing along the best of what we know, but we also are being innovative and moving forward. And so I won't introduce each one of these individuals as they come up. They'll just come up and do their thing. But I will tell you now who they are. So the first presenter is Dr. Kevin McCauley. I've known Kevin for many years. Among other things, he produced some years ago, 15 years ago, Kevin, a film which is called Pleasure Unwoven. Thank you very much. I've only seen it 400 times and shown it to clients. Maybe I'm tired, I don't know. But anyway, so he's gonna present to us something we call the pathway from treatment to recovery. Following that, Dr. Amber Deckard from, I should say that Kevin's a fellow at the Meadows. After that, Dr. Amber Deckard from Karen is going to present neurocognitive assessment and neurorestorative care for SUDs. And then our own board chair from the Meadows, Jamie Vink, will do the final piece called Heroes, Villains, and Everything in Between, the Reality of Treatment. So with all of that, no further ado, Dr. Kevin McCauley, please.
Thank you very much, Marv. Good morning. It's wonderful to be with you. The first time I came to a NAATP conference was when I got the award for the film, and thank you for that. That was a great honor. That film is very old, long in the tooth, still kind of goofy as it always was. But the one that I'm really proudest of that I made, the film that I made, is the sequel, which really covers what I'm about to say right now about, okay, now that we know this neuroscience, how are we taking that and translating it into ways to help people get through their first year, that critical first year of recovery. So at that time that I won the award, we had just opened up our little sober living house / recovery management program in Utah. I think we did great work. We served 94 men over 4 years. It was an idea ahead of its time, and so no one really knew what we were doing, and so we got a lot of quizzical looks, and people didn't really want to, form partnerships with us. They didn't understand why that would be important, and so it didn't work out. But I'm very, very happy to see the ideas alive and well in the work that you're doing. I just see by looking at the list of people who are here that those ideas are still alive. But I think that this issue of integration is what we were trying to achieve, and we didn't have the tools at the time to do that. And that's why I think these opportunities with electronic health records, with recovery apps, with AI, that may be the glue that can bind all of these things together in a way that we didn't have before. So as a public health school graduate, these are all the things that basically characterize a public health approach, and one of them is collaborative. The idea that working together and not conflicting is a shared value. The idea of that any effort in public health should be participatory. That's the nothing about us without us idea that I think is very critical. But the way we tried to structure, I tried to structure that film and I tried to structure our program was looking at models that already have very, very good success. And these would be models of recovery for high-risk professionals, safety-sensitive professionals, pilots, doctors, nurses, and interesting college students. And that was something that I really wanted to put front and center in the second film because it turns out the collegiate recovery programs have the same success rates as the other programs that are supposed to work because these people are such high-functioning professionals. It turns out you don't need to have that. It really comes down to the system of support that you have. And for that film, I kind of borrowed the idea that was very, very useful in preventing aviation mishaps. And this is this famous Swiss cheese model. The idea basically is that you're only going to get so far looking at the mistakes of individuals. You'll go ahead, punish, destroy whatever you want to do. But the fact of the matter is you're going to reach a ceiling unless you look at the system within which that person was operating, because that's going to be a lot more fruitful, right? And so we have to think about, okay, how can we set up a system around that person coming out of treatment, starting to enter their first year of recovery that will solve whatever problem comes down the pike. And that's what I think is important. The idea of future-proofing recovery, I can't even imagine what's going to come over the horizon in the next few years about ways of curing people from addiction. So we need a system that we can use to kind of help people negotiate and assess those ideas. But any good recovery management plan, this is what the FAA would require of you if you are a blackout drunk 767 captain at some airline and you want to go back into the cockpit. The FAA wants you to fly as long as you can document your recovery. So today, this is called the hub and spoke model, right? That's basically, we're kind of doing this before there actually was this idea that came out of Vermont to serve rural clients that they enter treatment, that they enter recovery in a hub, and what you're trying to do is bring all of these community resources together, and they should work back and forth. I think that what we made, the hub we used was housing. Housing is one of the most important public health or social determinants of health. So we made the house the way people encountered really good, AA meetings locally. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a family recovery program. So the house was in Salt Lake City. So we would connect people with those resources. And then there were certain processes like drug testing and monitoring. I felt that was very important. I also felt that it was important for the neighborhood to really try to at least be trying to find out, who in the house is actually sober. So we did something. I don't expect other people to do this. I just wanted to see if it could be done. We drug tested and breathalyzed every single day. And we were able to get that cost down under $5. We didn't send anything out unless we needed to confirm something. There was no extra cost to the person. But that idea was to, in the short term, as that person's coming out of treatment, are they in fact stable? And what's important is the staff tested too. I would never ask someone to do something for their recovery that I wasn't willing to do for mine. Now, did it work? I think that it did. We made it available to folks who left the house to be able to come back on a weekly basis and continue their drug testing. And of the 94, we had 22 who did that. So there was reasonable success. How confident I was in the test, okay, maybe I should review that, because when we closed and we were bringing the furniture out, we found all these little cups of urine, little, I guess, Mormon baby urine that people were using to get around the test. So, I mean, you can't have 100% success. But I believe that when we make mistakes in addiction medicine or in addiction treatment, it's usually because we've departed that very successful medical model. And so that disparity with what we would do for other patients with other disorders and what we do for people with addiction, that's where we make a lot of our mistakes. And so I try to look like, how is my program, my recovery management program, how does it resemble the rest of medicine? And we test. That's something that we do. So I don't think testing is going to go away. I think it's the one thing that we have to at least try to keep our feet on the ground. But I probably earn all of my money when I do lectures for our clients at the Meadows when I say, you are now a person in recovery and your medical history is now complex enough that you deserve a healthcare provider who is specially trained in the unique needs of people in recovery. And this is the idea of an addiction medicine specialist, doctor, nurse practitioner, physician's associate, who's had an extra year fellowship training and passed board certification. That, I think, could also be a hub, because once you've got that, then I'm not worried about what comes over the horizon. If you have that open, honest, trusting, compassionate relationship, whatever technology appears, whatever new, magical cure drug appears, you'll have a partner that you can kind of process that problem with. So, who knows what's coming, but we have to kind of create a system around that person so that they can kind of process us. And I just believe very, very strongly in the magic that happens when it's just, provider and patient behind closed doors, and that person finally feels safe. This is what I tried to create with my pilots when I was a flight surgeon. If you create a safe environment, they will come to you with problems that are potentially career-ending. And it's amazing when they do. And that's how you keep that squadron safe. That's how you decrease mishaps. So I believe in this. Whatever answer comes out of that relationship, I have confidence that it'll be the right one for that patient. So this is the founder of the program that I work at, and that is quite an honor to work at the Meadows. I remember when I got to treatment, I was coming out of federal prison, military prison. I was probably the happiest person that year to ever enter treatment. But when I got there, as usually is the case when you enter treatment, you get a stack of books. And hopefully one of them is the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. Ours was. We had that. But we also had a book that was written by Pia. And I didn't know who she was, but in that book, I remember she talked about this thing called the tree of addictions, that what all addictions had in common was some characteristic, and then the root of that trunk was unresolved childhood trauma. That's Pia's model. And that idea, over the last 30 years since I was in treatment, has stood the test of time. That has, I think, only gotten stronger, right? And so when you look at all the things that we could consider an intoxicant, chemicals on one side, and our increasingly growing understanding of how behaviors, too, can be just as powerful intoxicants, that's what kind of allows us to take a step back and really see how this person's addiction is playing out over the course of their life, moving, changing. But if we don't kind of get a sense of everything and have some way of sort of processing problems, then we're going to put that person at risk for simply drifting to another intoxicant. So what you've got in front of you there is the main thing that I use when I speak to any of our patients. I don't know why the colors didn't come across, but there it is. It's a little silly, like most of the things that I do, but it gets the job done. And so I will hand this out. We've got about 70, 80 people in our main program. I'll hand this out and I'll listen to what people say. Very often I have to say it's not a menu, all right? So don't start circling things. But I'm interested in what people have to say, like, is this bullshit, or that shouldn't be there, or my drug's not on there. I assure you it is, right? But basically what you've got on this single page is the summation of the main model that we have used over the last 30 years, at least in medicine, to understand addiction. You've heard of it. It's called the dopamine hypothesis, right? Now, dopamine is just the first chemical in a whole bunch of chemicals that we will need to understand. But this is the one merciful thing that nature gave us, was this rather strange straightforward hypothesis of how intoxicants work and how some people are much more vulnerable to them. So I've put all of the main points on there, and so whatever comes across the horizon, whatever new thing we have to deal with, what I would do is go back to the dopamine hypothesis and see if things don't kind of start to light up in terms of this might be a problem, all right? So I'll just tell you right now, so that yellow row, the psychedelics, I'm not that worried about the psychedelics because they don't release a lot of dopamine and they're not reliably reinforcing. Now, LSD definitely releases dopamine. It's not that it's not a risk, right? But I'm much less concerned about drugs like psilocybin than I am MDMA, which is an extremely powerful dopamine releaser, right? Now, I sit at the foot of my fellow senior fellows. I am absolutely teachable. I certainly would not want to argue with people like Bessel van der Kolk, but I'm the senior fellow who's interested in addiction and recovery, so I kind of have to wave my arms a little bit. I do not think you're going to be able to create a therapeutic container that will be able to contain MDMA. I just don't think it's possible. It's going to get out. But I have a lot of faith that we will be able to come up with a therapeutic container for something like psilocybin. GLP-1s, we don't have to worry about that because they're not up there, right? It's not that they don't affect dopamine, and we're going to have to talk about that at some point. Things are going to crop up. But this is the frame that I'm using to analyze these problems. And so I can do it pretty quickly. I'm going to just tell you what this thing is. And once you know it, it's so straightforward, it's impossible not to know it. You can't take it out of your brain. And you can go out into the world and you can solve problems using this problem-solving engine, your knowledge of the dopamine hypothesis. For instance, if you read an article in the New York Times that says that heroin addicts can go back to moderately using heroin, you will know why that's wrong, right? Why is it that vapes have not been the nicotine cessation product that we really had hoped they would be? Why is it that fentanyl is so much more deadly dangerous even than heroin, right? The dopamine hypothesis has answers for all of those things. By the way, if you want a very, very good prose description, summation of the dopamine hypothesis, I highly recommend Dr. Anna Lemke's book, Dopamine Nation. But this is the first study that really began all of addiction neuroscience. We've all kind of heard of it, the Olds-Milner study. What they showed is that laboratory animals would reliably self-administer drugs of abuse only to certain areas of the brain, and when they did so avidly and even at the expense of other survival behaviors and even to the point of death. So anytime you hear the word drugs hijack the brain, this is the study that they're talking about. The next study removed the probe that delivered drugs and replaced it with a double-bored syringe, right? And through the center bore, the animal could press a lever to deliver drugs, again, right there. And it doesn't seem to matter what drug you put there. Everything is amphetamine. If you put it into the nucleus accumbens, nicotine's amphetamine, alcohol is amphetamine, heroin's amphetamine. But when they did that, it completely took over the animal's behavior, and then immediately a little pump would suck up through the outer bore whatever fluid happened to be there. And when they analyzed that fluid, regardless of the drug, what they found was a change in the concentration of this newly discovered neurotransmitter called dopamine. And if you understand the next slide, you will understand so much about what drives the behavior of people like me. It wasn't just the amount of dopamine, it was the rate of increase of dopamine. So in a sense, the brain has a value calculator. It can tell what in the environment is good for survival, right, or at least important for survival, and the slope value of that curve is the brain's value calculator. And so the reason that drugs are so destructive is they take this very elegant system and they blow it out of the water. And that's what an intoxicant is. And perhaps you can see how that can vary from intoxicant to intoxicant, but if you do even that a little bit, you're on the list. And you could probably see that there might be ways to ritualize and manipulate certain normally pleasurable behaviors into intoxicants, and therein lies the toxic exposure. The brain was not designed for those spikes of dopamine. As long as that's still in there, you're not really going to see the kind of recovery that you want to see. So, like I said, dopamine's just the first in what's going to be a cascade of chemicals, but what dopamine is on its own is just the drive to get it. It's not a liking chemical because you need a whole bunch of things for that. It's the drive to get it, and the guy who did this research, Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan, has one of the best lines I've ever read in any literature about addiction. In addiction, it is possible to desperately, desperately want something that you have actually come to hate. And that makes no sense unless you're an addict, because that is exactly the experience, right? So if we were to drill down and basically that green arrow right there, or that blue arrow right there, that's essentially that synapse right there. It's the change in concentration of dopamine there. And every drug enters this little anatomy at a different point. And very often where it enters describes a lot of, or at least goes along with a lot of its features. And now we're starting to learn how to use medications to affect this. But the reason that spike of dopamine is toxic is that it damages dopamine receptors, and that is the basic defect in addiction. So this is Nora Volkoff's work, very, very famous study. Here are 4 normal brains. Don't have depression, don't have trauma, don't have addiction, never had ADHD as a child. They have plenty of these dopamine D2 receptors. And why do you need those? Because they drive the frontal cortex. So when you have plenty of them, the person can regulate their emotions, they have a sense of self, they can run their relationships because they have that adequate signaling up to the frontal cortex. This is the brain with addiction, this is the brain with ADHD, this is the brain with trauma, this is the brain with depression. Too few of those things. And so that you see a different activity in the frontal cortex. This is the insanity, as AA would call it, right? The task is, how do we get those things back, right? So just to kind of finish up this part, dopamine is complex. It's not just reward. Bad things, terribly aversive things release dopamine too. So this is a more modern understanding, I think, of what dopamine actually handles, right? So now we can start to analyze some problems. At the bottom of the list there, you will see what I list are the assumptions of the dopamine hypothesis. If it in fact is true, these are the things we can take away. And the first one should be clear. What makes it toxic and dangerous is the kinetics of its dopamine release. So if you look at something like heroin, right, the reason that heroin is essentially morphine boiled in vinegar is because it enters the brain faster. So even though it's the same molecule, heroin is a faster delivery vehicle for that molecule. And morphine will essentially last a few hours, and then you have to use it again. That's not true with this drug. And you can just look at the molecule and see the problem. This is an extremely lipophilic molecule. It rockets into the brain, and so the person notices an extremely intense euphoria, right? But the brain does something that it doesn't do with any other opioid. It immediately starts pumping it out. It's not gone, it's just not in the brain anymore. It's entering other tissues. And so you see a pattern of use that the dopamine hypothesis explains quite well. People use, and then immediately the high is off. So they have to use again and again. And all that time, right, that drug is accumulating in their tissues. So what the dopamine hypothesis and fentanyl in particular show us is that it's possible to die from a fentanyl overdose from a dose you took yesterday. All right, now I'm kind of out of time here, but I will leave this open for discussion, and I'd be glad to talk about this further going forward. Oh, let me just, yeah, there was never any chance, quite frankly. That's okay. That's okay. All right, Amber, all set.
I did not want to start by falling off the stage, so thankful to my husband for bringing me up here. Good morning. I know it's early. I know I have exactly 20 minutes, so I'm going to do my best to make this as focused and meaningful and hopefully at least at the minimum worth the coffee that you brought in this morning with you. Imagine for a moment with me that you walked into the cardiologist's office complaining of chest pain. And instead of ordering an EKG, instead of ordering imaging, instead of looking directly at the organ itself, the physician simply asked you how you felt, observed your behavior maybe over a few days, and then built your entire treatment plan from that observation alone. In every other area of medicine, that would be considered unacceptable. Bear with me also because I'm a walker when I present. And so it's taking a bit of my cognitive reserve to stay behind this podium. So if you see me start to move, I apologize. Okay, so for decades, that has largely been the model of behavioral health and addiction treatment, to say we're looking at symptoms, we're looking at problems, we're looking at presentations, right? But really, and we don't have a knowledge problem. We know what we're looking for, we know what we're up against, we know what we're fighting. But we do have a focus problem, because we've spent decades treating symptoms instead of consistently evaluating the organ driving them. For much of the behavioral health care model, the focus has historically been on the mind. But the mind is abstract, and the mind cannot be scanned. You can't get a volumetric analysis of the mind. You can't anatomically look at the mind. You can't measure the glucose metabolism of the mind, but you can evaluate the brain. And once you begin treating the brain as the target organ, everything changes. One of the most powerful things that happens when patients are shown that objective brain data is that the shame begins to shift. And they really are shown the data, right? It's placed in front of them. For many of the individuals that we treat, they have spent years believing that they are failing because of maybe a lack of willpower, that they are weak, they are broken, they're not trying hard enough, or the phrase, you just haven't hit rock bottom yet. It's not meaningful enough to you, it's not important enough to you. But the moment a clinician turns a page over or a monitor around and shows them objective dysfunction and exactly where it's taking place in their brain, the abstraction disappears. They realize they are not bad people. They're not failing to get better. They're human beings with an injured brain. And I want you to think with me just for a moment about how many patients we've all encountered over the years, and the ones that were labeled resistant, unmotivated, non-compliant, and how many of those individuals may have been struggling with significant underlying neurocognitive impairment or dysfunction that no one at that point objectively evaluated, right? We know that we get subjective information, but objectively, they weren't evaluated. That question alone should fundamentally change how we think about treatment. So I'll say it. If we only treat what we see, we cannot achieve lasting recovery. And this is where future-proofing treatment really begins. And I believe you actually just spoke to a tree, right? And at the base of the tree was trauma. The difference here in the model that we're currently using, and I hope that we can use to future-proof treatment, is yes, we want to look at the root system. Yes, we recognize life events, traumatic events play a role. But the root here is not the trauma. The root here is the brain, and being able to look at imaging and see the trauma in the brain, to understand the brain thoroughly and treat it, instead of saying, yes, there's trauma. We recognize that. Trauma is so important. It's impactful. But to be able to see it and see the role that it's playing. For some individuals, trauma can be there, as we know, and it may not play as significant as a role in one individual as it does another. We want to understand what is there subjectively and the role that it is playing. Because the future of behavioral health care cannot rely exclusively on symptom observation and subjective reporting, right? It has to evolve towards precision, towards objective data, and towards understanding the biological condition of the brain itself. At Caron, our neurocognitive assessment program was built around that exact philosophy. Right now, it is a 10 to 14-day intensive multidisciplinary diagnostic model designed to evaluate the brain from multiple perspectives simultaneously. because one of the greatest limitations in traditional healthcare is fragmentation. A patient may see, and I'm sure the majority of people here today have experienced this, the patient may see a primary care physician and then be referred to a specialist, but then wait months to see that specialist, whether it be psychiatry, cardiology, neurology, psychology, and all too often, none of those professionals are truly evaluating the patient together. But the brain does not exist in silos, so neither should treatment. Our teams collaborate in real time. And the piece in looking at this model, if you look towards the left side of the model, think of that as the assessment piece, the objective assessment piece. And on the right side of the model, you'll see more of the therapeutic treatment piece, okay? On the left side, you have psychiatry, you have in-depth neuroimaging. That can include MRI, where available fMRI, primarily FDG PET scan, which is that glucose metabolism. It also includes QEEG, and it includes a history and physical medical workup, concierge level lab work, pharmacogenomic testing, a clinical psych evaluation, and also a neurocognitive or neuropsychological assessment. This is the piece that allows us to really understand the individual, their brain, their history, and the underlying, the root cause, the brain, right, of what is affecting them. Are they, and we have objective data to say, is their brain functioning where it should be for their years of education, biological sex, and their age? And if not, what areas need to be the primary source of focus for treatment? Along with that, we're looking in the clinical psychology side to understand, where is there a barrier? Is there a barrier due to personality disorder? Is there a barrier due to a thought disorder, an underlying thought disorder? It seems simple when we say we just assess it, but it really is something that is objective and powerful. And I'll give you a brief example. We've had individuals that have come in that would swear to you that they met a certain criteria. The case I'll use is a bipolar disorder. Individual in their 30s, I am without question bipolar. I don't know why I am here. I've been on medication for years. I've been in treatment for years. This is who I am. They identified with the diagnosis. With this level of assessment, we were able to see in the FDG PET scan overactivity. So too much uptake in the brain. Instead of hypo, we saw hyper. What we also saw was an overactivity in the frontal lobe on the QEEG. What we also saw in the testing was thought disorder, nonlinear thought processes, and we also picked up on an extremely high intellectual capacity. So this individual presented, we'll say atypically, for someone with a thought disorder. The appropriate diagnosis for this individual was schizoaffective disorder, and it had been missed for the majority of their life. We were able, with the pharmacogenomic testing, to say what is going to be the best medication for you. We got them started on an antipsychotic and titrated them off their prior medications. About 3 weeks later, that individual came up to me and said, "This is the first time I've been able to sit here, read a report, make sense of it, and this is me. This is what I've been struggling with my whole life, and nobody's gotten that." So the importance here was, yes, we listened. We care about the subjective information. We're not dismissing it. It's important. But at the same time, we took what we saw objectively and were able to apply it and help this individual in their next steps. Then saying, we're not dismissing. We're not saying that therapy and group treatment, the things that we know that are working, we're not dismissing them, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're saying we're helping individuals stabilize by understanding their brain, treating their brain first, treating the underlying root cause so that they can then engage more meaningfully in those treatments. That is what's on the right-hand side, is to say these are the treatments that are offered as a part of their process. And at the top, you'll see neurotherapy. That is one line, but it packs a lot of options into it. That can be alpha stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, that can be neurofeedback, that can be cognitive rehabilitation or brain training, and that can also include hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which I'll show you an example of in the next upcoming slides. I would say that in using this model, technology allows us to see the brain. But people-centered care tells us what to do with that information. That's the subjective versus objective information. So, one of the clearest examples I can give you as far as the FDG PET and hyperbaric oxygen therapy goes is a matter that involved a 21-year-old female who entered treatment following 2 opioid overdoses in 1 month. The second overdose resulted in a prolonged coma and life support. By the time she arrived for evaluation, she demonstrated severe neurological and cognitive impairment. She struggled with gait instability, urinary and fecal incontinence, fine motor impairment, hearing deficits, and near global cognitive impairment. One of the examples of the presentation, if you have children or grandchildren, and you think of maybe one that's 3 or 4 years old, and maybe they got into mom or grandma's makeup, and they got the lipstick, and they thought they were doing an excellent job, but they kind of look like a clown when they come out, and it's because they're struggling with their fine motor skills to get that lipstick on appropriately, and it's in all the places it shouldn't be, right? This is a 21-year-old, and that was the presentation. And the cognitive capacity there was to sit, not engage. She was unable to read at 4th grade reading level and would put on lipstick like a 2, 3, or 4-year-old, wipe it off, and then reapply it. At that point, we moved directly, and we talk about this model being, it is a comprehensive model, but it is a flexible model because it truly is people-centered and individualized. This individual was not going to be able to sit through 3 to 4 hours of neuropsychological assessment. That wasn't possible. But what they could sit through was a brief cognitive assessment and neuroimaging to understand what we were up against. From the outside, many people would simply see addiction, and it was there. But when we objectively evaluated the brain, we saw widespread metabolic dysfunction consistent with significant hypoxic and toxic brain injury. This is her brain before treatment. So what you'll see, I know it's a lot of colors and it's a lot of words. So the simplest thing to say is all of those highlighted areas, purples and pinks, where you're seeing -2, -3, -4, those are standard deviations. Those matter to us. That means that each of those areas were significantly hypoperfused, meaning the metabolism, the glucose metabolism was under where it should have been for a 21-year-old brain, significantly, okay? Because she was unable to engage meaningfully in some of the other testing, we just did a brief cognitive evaluation. So I'm gonna skip forward and then I'm gonna come back. You'll see here the blue lines, attention, language, visual spatial was actually significantly so low that we couldn't put it on the graph. Immediate memory, so think of that as I told you a story or you looked at something and then I said, hey, what did I just tell you? Or hey, draw this for me again. And then delayed memory, approximately 20 minutes later, what's the story I just told you? What did you just draw? And then the overall cognitive abilities. We treated her with hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It was about 20 sessions at 1.5 atmospheric pressures. During this time, she began to improve slowly. That was about a 45-day window between the first session of hyperbaric and the last. This is her brain after 20 sessions, so after HBOT, where you'll see -1, even though it is still purple. For the FDG PET, when you're looking at Z-scores, and anything in the range of -1 is still considered within expectation. We're looking for things that are outside, so anything -2 or +2. So close, but basically this is showing significant recovery. It is not simply behavioral improvement, it is measurable neurobiological recovery. Importantly, those neurological improvements did translate into functional improvement. So that initial, we'll say 25, 30-minute assessment that we did, we were able to assess it after 10 sessions of hyperbaric, and then we assessed again after 20 sessions of hyperbaric. And what you can see here is significant improvement in attention, in language, visual spatial skills, and in memory. Are we saying that she was able to return fully back to the baseline of a 21-year-old female? No. But what we are able to say is she had significant improvement in both her metabolism, her brain functioning, and primary cognitive domains. That takes us back to, that's the goal, right? The goal is to allow someone's brain to recover to the point that they can sit in a group, they can sit in an individual session and meaningfully engage so that they can take on that toolkit and be able to use it later. As a piece of that, when we currently don't assess, when we don't assess for objective information, and we're subjectively taking on what they're saying, which is still important, we miss when this individual is sitting in group, when they're in an individual session. They're probably going to sit through it and go through the motions. But if their hippocampus, if their temporal lobe is not functioning appropriately, they are supposed to sit there and encode the information, consolidate the information in order to be able to retain it and then use it later. If those parts of their brain are not functioning, yes, they're sitting there, they are a body in the chair, but the likelihood of a return to use is much higher because those tools are not being encoded into the brain. They're not being consolidated, and then there's no way when life hits, because it will, that they're going to be able to retain it and then recall it for use when it's needed most, when they're not in our care. The piece here that was so meaningful to me with this particular case was we got to see significant change, and it wasn't because we had to tell her to try harder. Not because she suddenly said, you know what, this is worth it to me. It was because her brain was finally being supported biologically. This is the difference between symptom management and precision rehabilitation. So I'm going to go back to this slide. And this is why I believe the future proofing treatment requires us to fundamentally rethink the role of objective neuroscience in behavioral health care. Because if addiction is a disease of the brain, then the brain deserves the same level of objective evaluation that we would expect from every other major organ system in medicine. Not to replace therapy, not to replace human connection, but to strengthen it. For decades, many patients have thought, you know, I'm just not there, I can't do this, I'm failing, it's a moral failing. And they have been fighting invisible battles inside brains that we never objectively examined. And too often, they blame themselves for struggles they didn't fully understand. But when we can finally focus on the brain, our focus problem, right? When we can focus on the brain, we can change the conversation. The patient is no longer viewed as resistant or broken or failing. They become what was always there, a human being with an injured organ capable of healing and in need of healing. And that changes everything. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to do a little time travel today. And just for a moment, I want to take you back to December 12th, 2012. 12/12/12. Just out of curiosity, who was in the field at that point? Nice. Okay. I was working in a treatment center in Scottsdale, Arizona, as a clinical director, and there was an alumni group going on out front in our living room. Someone came running into our shared area and said, "Oh my gosh, former patient that just had completed treatment 2 weeks before had overdosed in his car outside." Immediately had called 911, and back in the day in 2012, we didn't have Narcan in our facilities. And the EMTs came quickly, took him away. He was able to be revised, thank God. He was not one of the 100,000 overdose deaths. He came back to our care. He completed residential treatment. He completed PHP and sober living. He completed intensive outpatient. He and I had a bit of a bond. We had both experienced early parental loss, and he knew that that was a trauma, the root of that tree, the fire in the basement, that he just hadn't been prepared to go there. I said, "We're going." And so he worked with me in my private practice for quite some time, and that 12-12-12 became incredibly meaningful to him and his family. He had it tattooed down his arm. I have a horse, in case anyone's wondering. He stayed in with my private practice for another year or two. I did a lot of work with him with his mom, and he maintained sobriety, got married, and I would hear from him every year on 12-12-12. One year he texted and said that he was about to have a baby and he wanted to name him 12. I said, "My friend, that's a bit much. If any of you have watched Seinfeld and the whole 7 thing," I was like, "That's just not going to work. I'm with your wife on this one." And so he went on and living a happy life. And we all know how it goes. You know, we lose touch, think about them from time to time. Certainly, all my clients are in my daily prayers. Actually, last month, we were all in San Diego for a board meeting, and I'm about to board the plane coming home. And this woman runs up to me, embraces me in a hug, and says, "Jamie, oh my gosh." And I looked, and it was my patient's mom. And I was so touched that she remembered me, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, do you remember us?" And I'm like, "Of course, I could never forget your family." And she shared that they'd gone on to, he and his wife had had 4 children and was still living a life in recovery, sponsoring others. That has stayed with me since last month so strongly and really resonated about the beauty and the gift of the work that we all get to do together. So as we reflect back on 2012, I really think about what our treatment model looked like back then, what our treatment centers looked like back then. And something that Marvin said a few years ago at this very conference, the center has held. And that's what I think about when I think about 2012. Yes, of course there's improvements. You know, dual diagnosis is now co-occurring disorder. We all openly talk about trauma. 12 steps still work if you work them and are still a wonderful part of all of our program. But the goodness in the work we do and that strong center of the community model and the community that we have together has held. And for me, that is just such an important reason of why I do this work and why we're all here together at this conference. So we know in our work, we experience some rough moments, don't we? And you know, the name of this talk is Heroes, Villains, and Everything in Between. We're going to get the villains right out of the way. Okay, so I love this guy, was able to find him. And when I think about him, I think about some of the villains in our space right now. We have trying to go in order so I don't offend anyone right out of the gate. But, let's start with payers. We have payers that aren't necessarily paying us enough to cover our costs. We have federal agency closures. We have Medicaid and Medicare cuts. We truly still have body brokers, if you can believe that that's still a thing in spite of all the hard work that we've done as an industry. They're still there, we know it. We still have people hijacking our sacred names digitally and trying to defer our patients to their shady centers when they're in their moment of need. So we know those villains exist. And if there's anyone that I have forgotten, please feel free to shout it out right now, because we want to be able to, I just remembered another one. How about the Google review blackmail? Has anyone feel like they've been, give me a full refund, or I'm going to just lambaste you on Google review? That's really a thing too. And so as I think through our shared villains, we have a lot that we're dealing with. But you know what? There's something new in our space, and those are villains in the media. And in 2025, there was a book that was published, and it was called Rehab: An American Scandal. This year, one was published called Addicted to Failure. And why I wanted to talk about this today is because these folks have huge platforms. This book, Rehab: An American Scandal, sorry about that. Who's read it? Has anyone read it? Okay, has anyone heard of it? I've been talking about this every chance that I can get. And so what this book does is it takes 4 very, very sad and tragic stories, and it goes in great detail about the many failures of the system. The one thing that I find interesting about this book and the other one is that they really, really attack the 30-day model, and that the 30-day model is inadequate. And I thought, well, tell me something that I don't know. These are things that we all work on a daily basis, and I'm sure in all of your centers, we do everything that we can to eke out an additional day of treatment, an additional day of coverage. I know with us, we scholarship so many days so that folks can get to safe discharge. Also, with the 30-day model, we know that we've all worked over the past 10, 15 years to have different pathways for care, to be able to have different point of entries, different ways to deliver care. And so that was one of the things that I found incredibly offensive about this book. Now, I talked briefly about the platform of this one. The author is a New York Times reporter. And so she has an incredible platform. She was given an op-ed in the New York Times, and also the Wall Street Journal covered this book and all of her expose and the scandal that is our work. So you can tell I take this real personally, and there's a lot of reasons that I do. So, there's some truth, right? Next book, Addicted to Failure. This one is very interesting because what this author did is they took everything that we've been working on and everything that we know for the past 10 years, like trauma, like addiction is a brain disease, like individualized treatment is always better, those kinds of things, again, focusing on the evils of the 30-day model, and laid it all out as though it's groundbreaking information. Neither of these authors talked about the association. None of them interviewed any industry specialists, cited any research, none of it. Sensationalistic tabloid journalism is what we're dealing with here. The thing with this book that really got to me is that we are not in the recovery industry is killing people, not saving them. Despite billions in funding and decades of treatment, overdose deaths continue to skyrocket while success rates remain dismally low. In this explosive expose, addiction specialist Jimmy Applegate reveals why traditional rehab fails 60 to 90% of patients and presents a revolutionary blueprint for genuine healing. I believe these books are dangerous. Imagine being out there in the contemplative stage of change, and this is what you read for your advice on treatment. And so I felt like it was important to be sure that we all understand that this is what's going on out there, and reinforces the need to amplify our success stories and to get behind movements like Force so that we are able to be one voice with data behind us. And so enough on the villains. I want to talk about heroes a little bit with that. So we're going to go on another time trip. This time it's 2020. And I was working in a large treatment center, and we were doing our best to keep the doors open. And what we were doing was we had essential worker bracelets so that we all felt solidarity and could also prove to the Tucson police that we were okay to be out on the streets. We had a grocery store in our program so that we could all go home and feed our families, pack kids' lunches. We did everything that we could to keep our doors open and to support our employees and their families. The other thing that really happened during that time is I've never seen such industry collaboration. I remember reaching out to Sean Walsh, who was the CEO of the Meadows at the time, and said, "Is your pool still open? What are you doing about your gym?" He had all of these wonderful connections with the state of Arizona, and so instead of hoarding them for himself, he connected me with his contact. And we were also able to stay open in fullness and be able to provide quality treatment. And so in a lot of ways, I really believe that 2020 brought out the best in many of us. I know it did bring out the best in me as a leader. So I started to think, okay, everyone needs to hear these stories. Everyone needs to meet these heroes behind the scenes doing this wonderful work. And so I started to interview people. And throughout the very, very dark days of COVID, I interviewed 45 industry folks. And I didn't want them all to be people that I knew. And so I would ask my colleagues, some of whom are in this room, hey, who do you think the best primary therapist is in the business? Who do you think the best director of nursing is? And I did a very, very long series of interviews about the why in the work, people's stories, those kinds of things. And so I was able to create a manuscript called The Treatment Team. And for each position, I had a detailed description of what that person did and questions that you could ask this person to understand if you were seeking treatment, what's important about their roles. And in that work, I was able to, out of the 45, I wanted to talk to you today about my top 3 and why these folks are my heroes and why their stories need to be amplified. So Bobby Ferguson is someone that we all know. He is past chair of the association, founder of Jaywalker Lodge, just a fearless advocate for 12-step, for treating young adult males, for the power of continued care and the power of healing and connection, and that the magic exists where even without a therapist in the room. And so Bobby generously gave me his time, talked all about his story. And what you didn't know, Bobby, is back in those 12 days, like I watched you from afar and knew that this was one of the good guys, someone that was doing it right. And if I ever had that chance to do the work, I'd want to do it like Bobby did. Nick Carderas, and I don't know how many of you were at the CEO lunch a few years ago, but what's so incredible to me about Nick is he was someone in 2016, he wrote Glow Kids. And he said, wait a second, all of these screens are creating dopamine rushes that are the equivalent of an orgasm for our children, for all of us, and this is not going in the right direction, and big tech knows it. He got ignored. The book did not do well straight away. Over the years, we found out that it's true, he was right, it's now a bestseller. And in the meantime, he opened up a place called Omega Recovery for treatment of tech and screen addiction. It's a fantastic program in Austin. I had the pleasure of working very closely with him. He's also passionate about his young adults. And so the interesting thing about both Bobby and Nick is that I think they would both tell you that they are frequent flyers in treatment, that they took their treatment stories, their multiple treatment episodes, harnessed those, and created programs as founders that have helped thousands upon thousands of people. If we listen to Jimmy, we would say that their relapse, that their return to treatment was part of a nefarious business plan. I mean, it's just so ludicrous to me that the beauty and the essence and the magic of our work is being debased like this. And so my final hero here is someone that's not nearly as well known, but very important. You know, when Dr. McCauley talked about the multidisciplinary treatment team, Dr. Tina Moyer is a psychiatrist. She created something called the holographic patient. And I can tell you, I spent 2 years touring the country with her, talking about the importance of collaboration when treating co-occurring disorders. And she was our associate medical director, and I promise you that in any treatment team meeting, everyone felt seen, everyone felt heard, and everyone's voice mattered. And to me, if we really are focused on collaboration and a multidisciplinary treatment team, then someone at the head of it has to carry themselves that way. She also held us accountable for making sure that we were functioning as a healthy family system. Is that my time? I heard a bell. No? Thank you, Marvin. All right. So here's my heroes, and I thank you for letting me talk about that. So in 3 minutes, I will tell you that what happened here is that the treatment team morphed into something called the Rehab Playbook. And that happened because a colleague of mine's agent that I had sent the manuscript to said, you know a lot of stuff. I put my kid in treatment last week. We need to take this book and we need to make it a how-to guide for people who are seeking treatment. And so I was inspired to rewrite the entire book, and that is the Rehab Playbook. Before, during, and after treatment, steps for folks to take, inspirational stories of work that's gone on, the true magic of what happens behind those doors. And I've come to think of it that we know 1 in 10 people who need treatment get it, right? This book is for the other 9. It will help them with their fear. It will help them understand what really goes on behind the doors and the wonderful people that deliver the care. The other thing is I go into painstaking details of things that I've seen derail treatment. For example, a luggage search. You really can't hide a burner phone. And an emotional support dog rather than a service dog. And those are the things that I have seen make people leave because they didn't understand. There wasn't enough clarity. And so this is a labor of love of mine, and it's been written in order to amplify the positive things that we're all doing. And so the work lives in between. And so these are the things, many of which we have talked about during this week, future-proofing treatment. And so I won't belabor a number of these points in our remaining time. Where I do want to land, though, is in that next generation of leaders. I feel like we have the obligation to ensure that the right people are stepping up and stepping into these important roles. Like-minded people people that will not necessarily have a halo effect with us, people that perhaps will mirror more what our patients look like than what we look like, and people that will guide us and lead us through all of this, all of these things, all these changes that we're going through. The other piece that I really want to have as a call to action for all of you, tell your 12, 12, 12 story. You've got a million of them. Your team has them. Be sure that the goodness of what we're doing every day is out there. Because I can tell you, the New York Times reporter has sold one hell of a lot more books than I have. And most of mine have been bought by the Meadows, truth to tell. And we give them away. Kate's got a lot of them. But in all sincerity, sensationalism sells, and ours is goodness, and it really is ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And so use your voice, amplify your stories, and let's be sure that we can drown out the haters. So with that, I thank you.
Kevin and Amber and Jamie, could you guys stand up so we can give you one more round of applause? Really, really good. And if you're left with the feeling that you want to hear more, then they did their job, and you will hear more. We'll keep doing this. So